For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. This is the show that examines policies and developments through the intersection of politics and economics to share a fresh perspective with you every week, especially in trying to unpack the underlying strategic imperatives. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Last week, the UNDP released its report on global poverty for 2022. It revealed that poverty had declined worldwide, but the bad news is that we still have 1.2 billion people in the world living in poverty. Worse, most of them are located in the global south. The big takeaway for India, though, is that between 2005 and 2021, India managed to lift 415 million people out of poverty. This is more than the population of the United States. How did India do this? And are there any lessons to be learned from the way UNDP measures poverty? To answer this and more, we have with us in the studio Mr. Amarjeet Sinha. Mr. Sinha is a veteran bureaucrat who has traversed almost every district in this country. He retired as a rural development secretary and then served as an advisor to the Prime Minister. At present, he is a member of the PSEB. In his career, he has had the unique distinction of designing several flagship programs of the government, including the Sarva Siksha Abhiyan, which enable universal education, and the Rural Health Mission. So in that sense, he's a perfect person to guide us through this conversation today. Welcome, Mr. Sinha.
Thank you, Anil.
Mr. Sinha, if I may jump into the conversation beginning with the UNDP report, it finds that poverty has fallen worldwide, but that's just the good news. The bad news is that 1.2 billion people still live in poverty. What are your first thoughts?
No, it's always a mixed picture in the sense that the good news is that a very large number of people, hitherto poor, multidimensionally, have come out of it. And when you assess multidimensional poverty, it gives you a better sense of how people's lives are, what assets they have, what benefits they're able to get out of public services and so on. But yes, the challenge remains and we still have large numbers to take care of.
The one takeaway that we get from the report is that using multidimensional measure of poverty, the number of poor are actually double of what you would have arrived at if you had used only the income method. What are your thoughts on this?
No, in fact, in a manner, the process of refining has gone on for many years. From the Human Development Index, where we actually look at the per capita incomes, we look at schooling and years of schooling, and we look at life expectancy to give us the Human Development Index. But when we look at the multidimensional poverty index, a whole lot of other factors from standard of living to education and health. And there is a certain weightage assigned to various contributions or asset deficit removal of the poor, whether it is to do with housing, electricity connection, gas connection, sanitation, and so on, nutrition. And the weightages are different. And from that perspective, it gives you a fuller sense. But as is always the case, some amount of triangulation is always required to be able to arrive at the true picture on the ground. And clearly, there have been substantial and significant steps forward. But having said that, there are also challenges, and especially on account of some of the post-COVID challenges pertaining to employment, to livelihoods, as also to the entire requirement of higher incomes.
Mr. Sinha, actually, it's very interesting because the UNDP argues all these deficits, whether it's health, sanitation, education, the key livelihood, life deficits, if you pair them, you can, it is in the sense you can unbundle the business of targeting poverty. For example, sanitation and drinking water. Of the 1.2 billion people we mentioned, 437 million people are without this. I mean, they suffer this deficit. So, public policy, by unbundling this, it makes it easier for public policy to target. Do you agree?
Yes, in fact, that is what makes all the difference, because we assign a lot of our better performance on pro-poor public welfare, partly to technology and partly to better identification of the deprived as well. And this is where the socio-economic census, though it was done in 2011, it is the first major identification of the deprived household, which is so objective. Very easily verifiable indicators are there. It is caste neutral, creed neutral, and religion neutral. If I live in a kacha room with kacha wall and kacha roof, I am a deprived person. If there's no literate in the household age 25 plus, I am a literate person. So from all these perspectives, what we find is that, first it put aside those who are automatically excluded. If they had a motorized vehicle, if they had 3 pakka rooms, if they had the refrigerator at home, they had a government job, of the remaining households, they were subjected to a deprivation set, which included all the points that I just covered. A household which is women-led without any male earning member. A Divyang-led household with no male or female earning member in the household. Things of this kind which were identified as the landless laborer. So I think based on this, and this is caste, creed, and religion neutral. Now, we all over the country, in India, for example, we had about 87 million people who needed this kind of support. We had another 16 lakhs, 1.6 million, who were in the chronic poverty group, which consisted of people who were manual scavengers, bonded labor families, not effectively rehabilitated, homeless people, primitive tribal groups which are very vulnerable. So when you add up the whole number, about 90 million people had to be covered. Now, good thing has been that what the deprivation indicators showed, that became the basis for selecting beneficiaries in the Ujjwala program, in the free electricity connections under Saubhagya program, in the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana program, in the secondary and tertiary healthcare under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, and so on. Now, this helped when people talk about the beneficiary social group. Now, again, a confirmation that probably the inclusion errors were very few. There were some exclusions, and this confirmed when you look at the 76th round NSSO, which pointed out that as far as the last quintile is concerned, the Q1, ever since we have used the SECC, there has been a 43% increase in the coverage of the Q1, which means we have actually targeted the poorest of the poor. Having said that, the report from the UN does mention that some of the poor households have got left out. As I mentioned, this is a 2011 field data collection which was released in July 2015. So in many cases, intergenerational poverty is reflected here, because what has happened is that the younger child who was 17-year-old is now 24, 25, has a separate hut of his own. That's why when we are now following a strategy of no one to be left behind, we are including all these groups. In fact, in all these programs, whether it's rural housing, whether it is gas connection, we have expanded the coverage through field validation, through the Gram Sabha validation, and so on. And therefore, this remaining bit also, I'm confident as far as these asset deficits are concerned, the pro-poor public welfare program, with the use of technology as a means, the IT DBT, the validation, the JAM plus SECC. If you ask me, JAM was, you can't have a stable table without a triad. So you had the Jan-Dhan, you had the Aadhaar, but you also, the DBT, but you also needed this fourth leg of identifying the poor correctly.
Actually, it's interesting. You are revealing how India cracked the code on fighting poverty. One, you have customized all these social welfare programs largely because it's no longer an invisible cohort. Thanks to the SECC, you have identified the cohorts, and thereby you're able to target the spending, right? I mean, if my reading of what you just said is true.
Yes, it does help. In fact, it also addresses social and regional disparities. In the sense, if you go by deprivation, then what you find, say, for example, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, they constitute about 20, those households are about 24-25% of the population in numerical numbers. When I look at rural India and look at only the deprived households, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes constitute about 42% of that population. So when I choose deprivation as the reason for identification of households, clearly my coverage of vulnerable social groups is even higher than what their numerical strength would indicate. Likewise, you'll find in many programs, whether it is the gas connections, whether it is the housing, whether it is the free electricity, many regions of the country, many states of the country, which had hitherto been deprived, you will find the coverage there has gone up many, many fold. The number of houses coming up in Bihar, the number of houses provided electricity connections in Jharkhand, where the gap is, when you have a universal coverage program for the deprived, most of it will go to states which have deprivation and high deprivation. Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bihar, parts of rural Tamil Nadu, parts of rural Maharashtra. So we find that in many of these programs, regional disparities as also social disparities both get addressed if SECC becomes the basis for a minimum level of coverage of assets with the poor.
It's interesting because the UNDP report says precisely what you just said, that the biggest reduction in poverty is actually in the highest incidence places like UP, Bihar. But this fight against poverty is this multidimensional approach, which is what is the prescription of the UNDP, that we should adopt this strategy to fight poverty. We can draw the roots to the Tendulkar panel, which actually first lifted it out of that pure consumption level to introduce other metrics in a multidimensional framework, right? I mean, so in the sense that public policy had already begun to incorporate this into its framework.
No, in fact, you're right. The Tendulkar committee and subsequently the Rangarajan committee. Now, this notion of a basket of goods and services that households need, and that the monetary equivalent of what we define as a poverty line should be adequate to meet these requirements. The challenge with such methods often is that the revision of that basket of goods and services doesn't keep pace. The other challenge is that in many cases, for example, if the public subsidies are very high, for example, if I was doing a field survey 30 years ago, a poor household would have spent 75 to 80% only on food grains. Today, because of the 2 rupee kg rice and a 3 rupee kg rice across the country, under the National Food Security Act, even if you carry out a consumption survey, the expenditure on food grains is a much smaller percentage of the total incomes of even a poor household. So expenditures on education, health, consumption also show. So I think some of these changes, if they are periodically updated, then it makes a difference. But clearly, that is the approach to follow.
So actually, when I look back, I remember when it was first proposed by the Tendulkar panel and subsequently Mr. Rangarajan upheld those views, there was a lot of chaos about the number of the poverty. A lot of people disputed the methodology, and in that noise, we missed this very qualitative argument that was being made by a lot of you, like what you just said on the approach to poverty to be multidimensional. So is that why we have managed in this 2005 to 2021, lifting 415 million people out of poverty? The incidence has fallen from a staggering 55% in 2005 to now 16.4% in 21. I mean, things may change post-COVID, but I'm talking about in the period till 21. Is that correct? I mean, the way public policy was tweaked with all these inputs from various panels?
Yes, clearly, this makes a difference when your targeting is clear, and when you have when all programs work towards universal coverage, that focus comes out very clearly. But we also have to bear in mind, when you look at India in a longer time frame, from 1991 marks a watershed as far as growth rates of the economy is concerned. From the average of 3.5%, 47 to 91, we move up to about 7% average in this period. So economic growth also reflects in a lot of the reduction. But when I look at the social development sector, what is 1991 to economic reforms is 2005-6 to the social development. Many of the indicators, and this is also because many programs started kicking in, so to say. The Sarva Siksha Abhiyan was started at the turn of the century for universal elementary education. The National Health Mission launched in 2005. So when you look at some of the rates of decline on some of these parameters of infant mortality, maternal mortality, I recall we were stagnating at 60 of infant mortality at the time, say when the National Rural Health Mission was being launched, 58, 61, 60, 58, around that. So the decline from there to 28 now has been possible because of many of these interventions. Similarly, on years of schooling, if I look at something not very old, 1986-87, 42nd round of the National Sample Survey, what did it tell us? 69.23% 6 plus girls in India had never enrolled in a school in rural India. Now, I think this is 86, 87. I'm not talking about 47. It only shows the neglect to primary education and how it reflected in our data even in 86, 87. But when I look at the 71st round, NSSO data 2014, for the first time, boys or girls, rural, urban, the gross attendance rates in classes up to class 8, 1 to 8, is equal. It only confirms the fact that a focused attention, now it's not that quality learning has happened on a large scale. Infrastructure, the provisioning has improved, and Sarva Siksha Abhiyan, many have rightly said, it was more a supply side initiative because the genesis of it was the famous Unni Krishnan judgment. Therefore, the normative frame is what contributed to it. On the health side, it's evident that we still need to spend more. Nutrition, again, the rates of decline with the health mission had speeded up a little. And again, this is one indicator, stunting and wasting, for example, which actually puts India to a lot of embarrassment. And I think the way forward, it's no rocket science. I still maintain it is no rocket science. Just that undernutrition doesn't lend itself to narrow departmentalism. I cannot get all the answers for undernutrition in ICDS. I will have to look for a framework which is larger than that, and somehow or the other, because even when you look at NFHS 3, the NFHS 5, which has come out now, which covers 2019 to 21. One, of course, in 2004, NFHS 4 also, there was a substantial gain because some of the works on health mission, but thereafter also, the pace is much faster. You find states like Sikkim, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, where stunting came down, even though it was high. And in the case of Sikkim, you find it across the board. Undernutrition came down, wasting came down. Now, it only proves that little changes. What had Sikkim done during this period? It had very imaginatively made use of public funds under, say, the MGNREGS to have spring sheds, which brought clean water to the villages. It had a strong social capital by way of community organizations already. And if you add clean water, strong community organization, and diversity of food through their thrust on organic. Interestingly, if you travel to Sikkim today, almost every rural household in Sikkim has a dairy shed. It has a dairy shed which they have constructed with MGNREGS funds as part of the individual beneficiary scheme, but they are using it for sustainable organic agriculture. both the cow dung and the cow's urine is collected commonly, and then they make a lot of the biofertilizers and biopesticides using that. So somehow, even when nutrition is concerned, it is this women's position, this whole holistic framework that we have all been talking about. It has to be a societal event. We cannot reduce nutrition till many more people in a panchayat are able to measure the weight of an infant, are able to measure the height of a child, an infant. Not many people, even in the ICDS, are able to do it. So if it is a priority, it should show in these details so that you are able to detect it very early. You are able to respond immediately.
Right. Gee, Mr. Sinha, that's interest. I mean, I totally agree with you that economic growth has definitely contributed between 2001 and 2011 census. India traded up materially in a relative sense. If you were walking, you were cycling. If you were cycling using a two-wheeler. But, the point on water that you made at Sikkim, it's fascinating because in Uttar Pradesh, I was looking at the data. In 2019, before they started this water mission, the households, the rural households, and by the way, UP is the biggest chunk of poverty till before these estimates came in, had only 1.7% of the rural households got drinking water in a tap. So, which kind of corroborates what you're saying, that unless and until there is a convergence from all sides. I like the point you made that there's also social monitoring that is going on. Panchayats, etc., are active. I want to take you back with you were the Rural Development Secretary at that point of time. I remember even talking to you at that stage. There was a very focused where you identified some gram panchayats where you targeted. You found them and targeted those panchayats, right? If I recall right. So could you walk us through that strategy of yours?
Yeah. In fact, luckily I was both rural development and panchayat secretary. And, one of the challenges which we thought we must address is that, if we are very interested in transforming every gram panchayat and village, our data is needed, and that's why we said, let's try and do a community-based data. So the Mission Antyodaya initiative, we said, okay, each and every village and gram panchayat, we want data which is formally owned by the panchayat and the collectives of women. Now, where times have changed, and again, which has contributed to this development, any of the program, whether it is Swachh Bharat, whether it is housing, whether it is electricity connection, one major social capital, which was true of the southern Indian states earlier, the women's self-help groups of the livelihood mission. We always say that southern Indian states poverty declined faster. Yes, it did. But when you do the analysis, and I've had a chance to dabble in some academic work to understand that, 6 factors made a difference in the 5 southern Indian states decline in poverty is concerned. Interestingly, the most important one was girls in high school, higher secondary, and higher education. The moment that happens on scale, fertility rates decline. When adolescent girls start going to schools, it creates a new identity which is independent of being somebody's wife or somebody's daughter. It's an identity of an adolescent girl all by herself in a collective. That's when self-help groups start forming. Health services in southern Indian states, superior to most of the other parts of the country, that contributed to one, ease of participation of adolescent girls in schooling. Since they had gone up to high school and also to higher secondary and higher education in many cases, and in some of those states, not all of them, Andhra and Tamil Nadu more than Andhra, Kerala not so much, was the access to technical education, in the sense nursing colleges, lab technician schools, paramedical professionals, IT professionals, textile related interventions, a lot of ITIs. As a consequence of this, skilling was to these 5 factors. When you add what Dr. Rangarajan did as Governor RBI 29 years ago, up to 10 lakh of loans without collaterals to women's collective, self-help groups. All these 6, according to me, are the most important factor which have led to this change. Kerala also, we celebrate the local government. Yes, the local government, but it's an accountable local government, because the notion of neighborhood household groups was central to the idea of decentralization in Kerala. The Kudumsri groups ensure non-monopolistic exercise of authority at the local level in the interest of the larger public good. Similar movements are there across the country today. My hope and optimism comes from the fact that what was true of the southern Indian states, we now have close to 85 million women in rural areas and about 6 million in urban areas who are part of the livelihood mission. In the rural, my own home state of Bihar, you go to any village today, if the PDS doesn't work, the village will say, Jivika Didi ko de dijiye. Give it to these women, they'll run it better. I think this is the transformation in rural India. Now, building on this, we had gone for a village level data collection every year. Now, 2017, we started this. Every year, 2nd October to 31st December, we run something called a Sabki Yojana Sabka Vikas, under which the effort is to do a Gram Sabha meeting in every Gram Panchayat to prepare the Gram Panchayat development plan and to do a ranking of the Panchayat in front of the entire village. We monitor the dates of the meeting. We don't keep it on one day for the whole country. There's one Panchayat secretary in 5 Panchayats. That order doesn't, when we do your Panchayats on 2nd October, it doesn't happen like that. We give them a window period of 2nd October to 31st December. Even the schedule is up on the website. Technology is a great means. Photograph of every meeting is there. And the data has to be validated by the self-help group women as also the panchayat. They have to work together. Even if they are at loggerheads many a time, they have to work together. And as a consequence of this, we said we'll collect data. Initially, we began with only 46 parameters, 30% for infrastructure, 30% for public services, and 40% for human development. Public services and economic activities we had put together, and infrastructure plus this. Now we have data on 143 parameters from every village and Gram Panchayat every year, available in the public domain on Mission Antyodaya at nic.in. You will be able to see it village-wise. You know exactly where the ranking is. And what do we find there? As was expected, 83% of Gram Panchayats in Kerala score more than 60% on these 143 parameters. So bare level of necessities are met for everybody around Kerala. In Bihar, only 18% of the Gram Panchayats actually have that. Now, based on these clear gaps, using the traffic signal motives, the red, amber, and green, every Gram Panchayat, when they're drawing up the plan, they have this before them. Look, these are areas we need to improve. In fact, Dr. M.A. Umen wrote for the Economic and Political Weekly on how useful the Mission Antyodaya parameter is. But I think we need to use much more of this. And that's why, we always had some reservations about panchayats. We because only heard stories about the Bolero vehicles, which many panchayat leaders bought with the MGNREGS funds. We heard about the Sarpanch Pati sitting next to the women even after the 73rd and 74th Amendment. But that second chair of the male Sarpanch Pati is vanishing in many states. It's not so easy for Sarpanches to buy Bolero vehicles for themselves with public funds today. Simply because these women's collectives are the countervailing presence which makes the difference. If we are able to pursue this route, if we are able to ensure a 60% or 65% on those 143 parameters of public services, economic activity, infrastructure, and human development, we are done. We are able to cover everybody. So clearly, these approaches where you have data right up to the last point, when we have communities gathering data, often there is some embarrassment also. No department can claim that we have done this. They will say, no, it has not happened. I will not mention the places, but yes, we have had instances where a village was declared open defecation free. But the panchayat said, no, we have 38 people who still go. And, we were put to a lot of embarrassment. What is this? It happened to be a village, to a fairly important person. And then, newspapers started covering, this is still not ODF. Now, I'm raising this because when you have communities doing the data, it's very difficult to hide truth. Technology allows you that opportunity for real-time monitoring. allows you that opportunity for communities to engage in that process. And if we are open to listen to a lot of the voices from the ground, I am certain, and especially on nutrition as well, panchayats have to have a role. The 29 sectors in rural areas and 18 are urban. Urban, we will need another tier of elected leaders. The problem with the urban ward is, in a large municipal corporation, 30,000 to 3 lakh is the population of a ward. You can't have community action at that number. You need smaller units. They live at a busting level. But unfortunately, urban hamlets don't have elected leaders. As a consequence, you have muscle men who give you electricity, who give you gas, who give you everything. If you want to move away from muscle men to genuine community participation, that's a change you'll need.
So the subtext of what you just told us is so heartening that you're basically, yes, poverty reduction is happening, but behind it there's a fantastic socio-economic transformation that's happening on gender, caste, and this name and shame that you're talking about in panchayats. Most impressed that normally it would be muzzled, any dissent. But you're saying that more and more people are active. Actually, I have a quick follow-up question for you on the data. If all this data is available on dashboards and everything, why is it that at a national level, there's always a paucity of data? So if you want to measure poverty, you have to go back some 5 years. Why is that? I mean, you depend on, now you've obviously got alternative sets of sources of data. Why isn't this leveraged to tell a current story about development in India?
That's why when you form an opinion about how we are doing today, you actually need to triangulate a lot of data and read them together. I, for one, will very strongly recommend that we must look at the Mission Antyodaya Gram Panchayat village level data, because that tells you the ground situation as it obtains. Along with it, say the National Family Health Survey is there, the NSSO. The strength of the National Sample Survey is unquestionable because they have decile-wise reporting also. You want to know how the Q1 is getting affected, the lowest quantile. That is what tells you about it. Now, we have these, the repeats, for example, when we are looking at basic necessities, the bare necessities, as Economic Survey had called, the 10th chapter in the last Economic Survey had provided for it, where basically what we had tracked was 69th round of the NSSO done in 2011-12 and the 76th round done in 2018 October. On 26 parameters of sanitation, cleanliness, housing, pakka drains and so on, pakka roads, they had done a comparison. Now that gives you 2 times at various points of time where how things have moved. The NFHS similarly gives us good, reliable information, and now it's going to give us district level data also, which will help because any program that you monitor, say the aspirational districts, the real test is at the level of the district level disaggregation. How does that district figure as compared to the state average? If it is closer to the state average, clearly the program is done well. So here are these parameters, NFHS, NSS, the census, the Mission Antyodaya data, read together with some good, insightful, independent research studies. Now, a lot of the studies on, say, for example, the livelihood mission, you have to actually open yourself for as much public scrutiny as possible. We've had a team from Stanford University, Anjani Kochar and the team, who did a study on the livelihood mission. We had the Institute of Rural Management, Anand, which did the study. So where it helps is in building, understanding what the weaknesses are, and also in helping in moving towards a particular direction. And clearly, what is coming out very clearly is the fact that we have had successes, but COVID, for example, a lot of the household surveys post-COVID are showing the major challenges to learning today, for example, the learning poverty. It is also showing the challenges with regard to incomes, employment, and livelihoods. And, while the asset, if I look at purely, there's economic growth, there is human development, and there is the asset base of the poor. We have performed better on the asset base of the poor because of the pro-poor public welfare programs. We have a long way to go with regard to employment, with regard to incomes, and more so with more and more people moving to non-farm or rather looking for non-farm avenues, somehow we have not kept pace in that provision. The displacement is happening. As a consequence, wage rates will remain in the rural areas because there are more people to do work than the work available. I think these are some of the challenges we are facing.
Actually, that's an interesting segue for us, because what you're saying, the fight against poverty on the numbers, that has been partially won. I mean, we can't ever declare victory, but we have crossed the tipping point. But you're saying now there are deeper challenges involved. Some of them you mentioned, like skilling and employment, etc. But tell me, you have been championing this Manav Vikas mission. So to come to the next stage, because unless India solves this next stage, idea of a developed country in 2047 will be missed, right?
Yeah, in fact, thank you for raising it, Anil. Frankly, I had the occasion to lead the Gram Swaraj Abhiyan, in which we were trying to provide for electricity connections, gas connections, immunization, bank account, Jandhan accounts, life insurance, accident insurance, and LED bulbs to about 63,974 villages purposively selected. These were villages which were large, 1,000 plus in rural areas and 500 plus in hill areas. And minimum 50% population belonged to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, that we did through this communitized approach, where local communities, where panchayats, where frontline workers, state government, district administration, CMDs of Rural Electrification Corporation, Power Grid, Indian Oil, everybody was in the field. Center, state, local government, it was a partnership of all governments to secure these. Now, these were tangible benefits which could be done in a campaign mode. Education, health, livelihood, skills, we really need to work. Nutrition, 5 of these things: nutrition, education, health, livelihood, and skills. Today, if you ask me, across the world, there is no nation in the world which became developed without the human capital. We have our IT products and IM products leading organizations across the world. But unfortunately, as a mass education system, we've not done well. And even SSA has not helped as far as the quality is concerned. Poor people have voted with their feet for their aspirations for education. But in terms of quality, we have a very long way to go. Now, my belief is that the panchayats and the community organizations, they have to be trusted more. The time has come for funds, functions, and functionaries with panchayats focused on just these 5 things: education, health, skills, nutrition, and livelihoods. I am absolutely confident that we will be able to achieve a lot of what we have set out to much faster. We will also be able to sustain high rates of economic progress, because economic progress simply cannot be unless we move up the skilling ladder, unless we move up the productivity ladder. There is, if I have 5 crore households reporting for work of unskilled labor in Narega year after year, it reflects a certain development failure. And the only way to get about it or go around it is to be able to raise the skilling level, to raise the production possibility frontiers. And there is a possibility. A lot of effort is going on in that effort. But I think time has come for us, when the panchayat elected leader and the prime minister, all of them monitor the same set of 18 or 20 indicators pertaining to education, nutrition, skills, and livelihood. There's no reason why we will not improve. There have been experiments in different parts of the country. Tamil Nadu's work on skills, for example. Any district I am in, all I need to do is to go and ask for some skilling option, and I will get that, because there's a pool of providers available there. Likewise, on employment, Madhya Pradesh had tried in the livelihood mission villages. They opened a register where they entered the names of every youth, men and women, who wanted employment. From job fairs to skilling to other self-employment opportunities to them. And they started declaring villages with no unemployed. Now, that kind of a strategy encouraged many of them. Under the livelihood mission, they started something called a Lakpati. I think the reason for hope is that the livelihood mission is not only about 90 million women. It's also about 95,000 bank correspondents who are from among the livelihood mission. Technology today allows me the opportunity to pay a dying old 90-year-old woman her pension on her deathbed. It's possible now. If we had followed only the traditional system that banks have got commercial BCs and they'll do everything, nothing would have moved. In the remote areas, these are the only women who go. We have women's collectives doing public transport because in Naxalite areas where you have Pakka roads, in spite of it, nobody wants to ply a public transport because they feel unsafe for law and order reasons. But who's going to touch these women's collectives? Nobody. As a consequence, 2,165 such routes today have our women's collectives. We've given them an interest-free loan and they're applying on those roads. They're running more than 25,000, what they call a common, not exactly, it's a common service center for agriculture, where they've got pump sets, they've got soil testing labs, they've got pipes for pumps. Any villager can hire it from them. Now, I think that is the challenge that we face. The skilling levels have to go up. The educational outcomes have to be better. And nutrition, again, with full confidence, I can say stunting and on wasting. If we follow this approach, the day every panchayat leader and every local community person is able to measure malnutrition in an infant, able to take the weight, and that day itself the change will show. It is no rocket science. All it requires, it needs coordination. Basic medicines are important. We had done a study, the focus study some years ago, where we had found 50% of children 2 weeks before the survey had minor ailments. Somebody had fever, somebody had diarrhea, dysentery, somebody had skin infection, somebody had eye infection. It neither needed a doctor or anybody, it only needed a community worker with basic medicines. If you don't attend on time, it multiplies. Because one diarrhea bout and you're not able to take care, 2-3 rounds of diarrhea, dysentery, and the child is already sunk into wasting. When it becomes very difficult to get the child out of it. So I think so there is hope. At the same time, there's an agenda for action. Education, health, skills, nutrition, livelihood cannot wait. Our credit access has improved, but still have challenges. If I want nano enterprises to become micro and small and medium enterprises, we'll have to find a solution to the working capital problem. A 10 lakh has been raised to 20 lakhs for SHGs now. It helps. But we are also trying to formalize the SHGs, put them on e-markets, put them on the GEM portal. Many of them have registered. They've got businesses also. But the major challenge is one of working capital. We have to find solutions innovatively. And I, for one, strongly believe that even a program like the Swamitva, which has now covered 1/6 of the villages of the country, drones are mapping. Now, not many people in this country know that in rural areas, housing areas are not mapped or surveyed. We had no land records for where the houses are. It is all listed as Abadi land, and that's where all the houses are. As a consequence, agricultural land I cannot mortgage. So the total formal lending in rural areas is low because of that. Swamit is giving them a revenue card. After the drone survey, after all the systems, a revenue card, now the banks are giving loans against that revenue card. So in effect, you can mortgage your housing in rural areas for borrowing for your activities. So clearly this will improve capacities of many of these units. And as we have found across the country, you go to the villages near any large city or even a medium-sized town today, all adjoining villages have become major centers of warehousing. Because all the FMCG products, whatever it is, nobody stores them in the cities. They've all gone to neighboring areas. Could we not have done it more systematically? So there are opportunities, and clearly there is hope, but there is also a need for focused action on these 5. And, just as our dream of being in the top 50 on ease of doing business, we ought to have a vision of top 50 in human development index. Because unless and until we focus on education and the human capital, the skills, the nutrition, health, we've done well on vaccination. We've done well because we've respected the need for human resources and the systems right up to the last point. There are other needs in health as well, and there is enough economic argument of market failure in the health sector because of information asymmetry. Therefore, we need public systems. Tamil Nadu and Kerala have large private sector, but they offer quality services, and the countervailing presence of public systems ensures cost and quality is both better. I think many of these factors, there is enough literature and an evidence to go by. Technology is a great means. Evidence-based policies, community connect is the way forward. I think there is hope, but lots of plans of action as well as we move forward.
So, Mr. Sinha, final thought from you, from whatever you have just explained to us. There's clear economic value in battling poverty and in eradicating it by making them stakeholders in the system. And the fact that 10 years ago, 430 million people didn't have a bank account. Today they have, and we are near saturation in bank accounts. In that sense, they have got a toehold in the formal economy. So, your final thought, especially in the backdrop of this phenomenal policy achievement of 415 million people being lifted out of poverty, and you have overlapped, your career has overlapped with this phase. And like you rightly said, it didn't start 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but it's a long battle. Now, for the next stage of the battle, your final thought that yes, it's been a great achievement so far, but very briefly, what is the next steps that India needs to take, particularly in terms of one point you've repeatedly made, access to data?
No, thank you for raising it. Technology is a great means, is a great guide. Evidence-based planning is the way forward. Ability to actually disaggregate it at the local level, because we always hear about major dashboards here and there. Dashboards are required most where the activity is. If a local panchayat or a village can see that, oh, these are the kids who need immediate attention, it will make a difference. So I think ways of using data, the technology is there, the means is there. And along with technology, again, the fact that we need a greener world, we need lifestyle changes for environment. So many challenges are coming up at the same time. And I think if you actually minus all the global warming, I can only say that after all, where is the challenge? The challenge is that you really need to craft a new way of understanding what is development. In some form, you can't go back to the Gandhian thought of everything small is beautiful, the Schumachian thought. But you still need to give it some thought, because the process that went into it, a lot of those statements of whether mass production or production by masses, living as part of nature or apart from nature, they have to be understood. The economies of scale in large production systems will remain. But the challenges and now there are studies which say that smaller towns are more sustainable from environmental and other ways, financial sustainability, than very large metropolises. If that is the case, here is, and one of the countries I find, Netherlands, for example, I found it very interesting. The distinction of urban and rural is not in the form that we see. The planning systems are common. A lot of their counties at the lowest level combine both urban and rural areas. So somewhere or the other, this integration, a lot of effort is going on in that direction. One district, one product, and so on. But I think the whole act has to come together. We have made good beginnings. But I think community connect holds for even infrastructure. If we want to move infrastructure faster, community connect is the way forward. Say internet connectivity. We know what happened with the BharatNet in the earlier efforts so far. If communities don't get involved, I may lay the optic fiber, but somebody takes it away tomorrow and we didn't know what it was meant for. So unless and until we get communities to own these facilities or public services, and that's why at the end of the day, that is where our strength lies. And panchayats and self-help groups working together, or say very active dairy primary cooperatives in many parts of the country, women's dairy or otherwise, it makes a difference. But what we do find is collectives are often able to transcend a lot of the politics of men, which is governed by caste or religion or whatever, So I think somewhere or the other, I think it's important for communities to come together to bring about the transformation. And it's possible today because data is local, evidence is local. It tells me where I am compared to the neighboring village and why I am still back. And there are people who want to make a change. We need more professionals in rural areas. We need more professionals who can actually handhold. More than public subsidies, what is needed is professionals in rural areas. If you want poverty reduction to be faster, the roads are there. Some left, maybe. Most of them are in place. And roads reduce poverty more than many of other poverty interventions. So when mobility improves, things change. So a whole lot of factors. One can't generalize. India is too vast. Mizoram's challenges are different to what Kanyakumari faces, but that being what it is, I think there is hope. At the same time, there's work to be done. Thank you.
Actually, if I may sum up the gist of what you just said, is that it's time for national consensus from the top to the bottom at the grassroots level. That's serious homework for all our politicians and, of course, for all of us too. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Sinha. Extremely, it was a very illuminating and insightful conversation. Thank you again.
A pleasure, Anil. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNews Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your insights and comments with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode of Capital Calculus. Till then, stay safe.